Hi, welcome to the Red Tunic Podcast, a podcast where I look to rediscover what makes gaming fun and enjoyable by having positive conversations with those related to the industry. My name is Link, and today I'm joined by David Szymanski, creator of Dusk, contributor to Dread XP and Gloomwood, the upcoming Iron Lung, and several other self-published and developed games. Hi David, how are you doing today?
Hello, good.
Well, that's great to hear. So, David, thank you so much for making the time to talk with me today. I'm, always appreciative when I can steal time from people. And before we get started, would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself for those that might not know who you are?
I'm a game developer, obviously. I live in rural Pennsylvania, which explains a lot about, Dusk, I suppose specifically, which is set in rural Pennsylvania. Let's see, I do a whole bunch of stuff actually. The main one being game development. I also do a bit of writing, and I compose. I actually have my degree is actually in music, not in anything related to anything that I'm doing. And I don't know how much of my life story we really want to get into. That's about the most relevant bits, I think.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And, why don't we see where we go? Because, we might land into some young and old and everywhere in between,
Okay. You mean just as far as like who I am outside of the game development,
Yeah,
or
definitely.
like,
Or, whatever else we stumble across, I guess.
yeah. Um well, I don't let's see. I'm one of those workaholic type people, I guess you could say. I wasn't back when I had jobs that were stupid. When I worked at Dollar General or worked at a car wash, I didn't really care that much about doing work, but I've always been really obsessive about creative projects. When I was younger, uh, younger as in like adolescent age, I was always like writing stories of some sort, or programming, or writing music, or stuff like that. It was like that's kind of what I did in my spare time, other than exploring outside or gaming. Um, and that's kind of continued. Like my life kind of focuses around creative projects mostly. If I'm not working on a game or something like that, and I'm, quote unquote, taking a break, usually that means I'm working on something else that's less of a real job, maybe like writing an album or something like that. Um, so I think having a family helps keep me from just becoming a complete, like, uh, just a complete sort of like John Carmack, a recluse. Well, he's not really a recluse, but they're just like having my entire day be nothing but this stuff. I have a wife and two kids, and so I kind of have to. Uh, I'm kind of forced to take time to do things that aren't making games, which is very healthy, I think.
Yes, I would not disagree with that statement. The the way you said it there had me worried for a moment that you were almost inferring that you would much prefer to be doing that, but
No.
yes, exactly. I was going to say I'm presuming that was just a oddity in how I was interpreting things and not what the real intent was.
Yeah, no, it's very good that I'm forced to not just work on stuff all day. I don't think it's I had the ability to do that more so um before my wife and I had kids, and I don't think it was good for my mental health at all. It was good for you know productivity for making a lot of games, but I don't think I was very happy. Um
Yeah, and I think a lot of people can relate to that because realistically, having some form of work-life balance and being able to do things that, while you may enjoy, Also being able to do other things you enjoy and not, I don't use this negatively in, the exact sense here, but becoming obsessed with doing something, sometimes isn't the healthiest thing, which I think you kind of
Yeah.
alluded to with the mental health and such statement.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, I also want to note that looking at what you've contributed to, what you've worked on, the personal projects or self-published or however you want to phrase that, your contributions
Mhm.
to the Dread series collections or what have you, it doesn't it doesn't surprise me to hear that you put a lot of time in, just because there's you have a there's a catalog that speaks to it. um
Yeah, I've worked on a lot of games.
yeah.
I think last count, right now there's 14 on Steam that I've been involved with directly. Um, and then stuff I did before Steam that isn't really relevant. Um, so yeah, and that's uh since what, like 2014, 2014, I think, is when I sort of officially became a professional game developer by virtue of actually making money at what I was doing instead of it just kind of being a waste of time.
Fair. Yes, I know exactly where you're going from. Where you kind of get that the Letterman jacket or what have you, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
Now, you said, you started that, several years back, when it became official, so to say. Would you mind touching on how it is or what it is that got you into developing and making those games?
Let's see. So, do you mean developing and making games in general, or just the horror games that I started my professional career with, or like, because they're both different. They're different.
Well,
It's,
I think whichever you feel the most comfortable sharing, I suppose.
well, I can do both. So I started game development when I was a young teenager. Maybe even young, not even really a teenager yet. It started out in grade school, actually. So yeah, not it started in grade school with me being obsessed with Myst, and Myst was made on this. It was made using this program called HyperCard, which was sort of this old version of this old, presentation software, sort of like PowerPoint. Um, and in school, this is when I was in public school. After in high school years, I was homeschooled. But for elementary school, I was in public school, and we were using, or not using, we were learning how to use Hyper Studio, which is sort of the same thing. It was, a similar version, and it just sort of came to me one day. I'm like, wait a second, I could make my own game that's like Myst, because I love Myst. That would be awesome. And I did that, and unfortunately, that game's lost now. Um, it would be really cool to go back and see what it's like, but I mean, it was garbage, and it's gone now. But um, and that is what sort of got me into this state of mind of being like, I can make this stuff, instead of just like playing the games, being like, oh, it's possible for me to kind of make things like that. And then I pursued learning how to actually program. I started with Microsoft QBasic, which is not a very powerful programming language at all. Um, but I made a couple games with that, which you can actually play in. If you buy Dusk 82, those games are included with it, with like DOSBox, like all wrapped up to run. If anyone wants to wants to take a look at those. Um, and then I sort of just drifted away from it, I guess. But when I got into like going to college, or into later years of high school and like going to college, um, and then I discovered Game Maker in college, and let's see, how did this go. I think yeah, I think it was that I discovered Game Maker, and simultaneously I was introduced to Stalker, and I really was like I was really into Stalker. I'm still really into Stalker, but like I was just amazed at like the atmosphere and the whole dynamicism of the world and stuff like that. And I tried making my own sort of Stalker-ish game in Game Maker, um, which you can also play. That's actually I think on my itch page, and it's not very good either. But after that, I made a bunch of Game Maker games, and throughout, all this time, it was always just a hobby. And I thought maybe someday in the future it'd be cool to make like a bigger game, but indie games were not really they weren't really a thing. Um, you didn't make money making indie games. You you made them and you uploaded them to like Newgrounds or Yo-Yo Games or whatever, and you hope that maybe somebody would play them, and that's kind of the best that you were going to get. Um, but then that changed, obviously, around 2012-ish, 2013. Well, it was around 2012 or 2011 or so. Um, I think that's when the whole Xbox Live thing started picking up steam, right? But then by the time we got to like 2014, Greenlight was a thing, and I was out of college. I'd finished my degree, but not gone on to pursue what I thought I was going to do, which was I thought I was going to be a music professor and then compose on the side. And I discovered in college that I hated college. Um, and so I had no desire to spend the rest of my life in college. um, so I, got married and moved back home, and well, not back home, moved back to my hometown, um and kind of didn't know what I was going to do at that point. I was working part-time at the local car wash, um and then at some point that turned into working part-time at a somewhat less local Dollar General. But I discovered Unity was sort of like picking up steam, and to learn Unity I decided to make this game called Fingerbones. And that came about, it was sort of a long time coming. The stuff that I made like in Game Maker was usually very arcadey, very like gameplay focused, not very story driven, but I'd started thinking a lot about narrative in games and horror in games, and I'd never made a horror game before this point. And I was really struck by, in particular, by this game called Scratches, which is a oldish point and click adventure from like I want to say maybe 2009, or had to have been, no, I think it was earlier than that. But it's like a horror point and click adventure, and I played it and was really struck by how it was like scary, but it was scary not because you were getting chased by stuff or there were monsters everywhere. It was scary just because of like the narrative that was happening, and that was really fascinating to me, and I wanted to try doing something like that. Um, which doesn't sound all that unique now, because now there've been a whole bunch of a whole bunch of horror games that do that same thing. But at the time there wasn't really this is when like Slender was the big thing. Amnesia and Slender were it jump started the horror let's plays. um and so my big idea was, I'm like, I want to make a horror game that there's like no threat. And that's what resulted in Fingerbones. And Fingerbones, I figured I would upload to it was Game Jolt. Then I'm like, oh, well, I'm gonna upload it there, and maybe like 10 people will play it as usual. And if I'm really lucky, maybe it'll take off. So I uploaded it, and I went to sleep. And the next morning, I woke up, and it was like featured on the front page. I still don't know why they did that. They were like really impressed with it, which becomes weirder and weirder to me the further out I get from making Fingerbones. Like they were really impressed with the game, and actually got like a message from Game Jolt being like, "Hey, thank you for uploading Fingerbones to Game Jolt, and here's it's all featured and stuff." So it's featured on the front page, and a ton of people played it, and a bunch of people did Let's Plays of it also. Um, and that's when I was like, wait, maybe, this took off. What if I can make another game like this and actually charge money for it? At that point, I wasn't thinking of putting it on Steam because that was just like, I couldn't imagine that actually working. Um, I just made it to put on itch, and I did that. That was the Moonsliver. Made that. I put it on itch. I earned like some money, which is infinitely more than I'd ever earned making games, and it was like shocking at that point that people actually bought the game. And then when the time, I was just sort of like, what if I put it on Greenlight? And I put it on Greenlight, and it sort of languished on Greenlight for a while, and I pushed it and thought, this is never going to work. And then one day I woke up and I'd gotten greenlit, so I could sell it on Steam. Um, which again, like it's crazy how quick this stuff changes. At the time that was like huge. Like, oh my gosh, I could get on Steam. This is just when the concept of the indie apocalypse was starting to bubble up in everyone's mind. When the floodgates were starting to be opened. Um, so I put that on Steam. I had this really lucky mistake happen when I released it where how did this work? I like released it and had it discounted as you do. And then I saw that the Halloween sale was coming up soon. So I'm like, oh, I'll just add it to the Halloween sale also. And I think if I remember correctly, what ended up happening is that it sort of stacked the discounts. So the game up being discounted for a ton. It was like I think less than $1 or something, and somehow because of how the Halloween sale worked, um, enough people bought it that then it was like sort of visible on the front page. Not like big feature or anything, but it was like you could see it on the front page somewhere. So then a bunch more people bought it because it was really cheap. So basically, I ended up having this huge influx of people buying the game. Um, it wasn't actually that huge amount of money now, like thinking about it now, but for at that point it was like quit my job money. I think I ended up earning like $5,000 in a week or something like that, and $10,000 in the first payout, which not that much, but living in rural Pennsylvania, working part time at Dollar General, that was like, holy crap, this is more money than I've ever had at once in my life. Um, and then the rest of the games came after that, essentially. To make a long story long, that's how I got into game development.
Oh, and that's really amusing. Just the amount, like the luck, so to say,
Hmm.
of
Yep.
accidentally pricing your game into such a place where it drew a bunch of attention from, well, one that it lucked out right before, like a horror game lucked out right before Halloween,
Yeah.
through the green light process, which for anyone that doesn't know, you touched on it, that was right around the time that Steam was like, okay, screw it. We're not going to deal with, you having to be big publishers. You can just, we'll let people vote on it. And you're like, kind of like a Kickstarter, but
Hmm.
the community got to say yes or no, and bought in with votes or whatever. But
Yeah.
like just the amount of luck to get greenlit right before a Steam sale or a mini Steam sale, and then
Hmm.
accidentally price it at such a place or a point where it was, and I don't mean this in any, disrespect, but at such a price point that a lot of people would be like, oh, screw it, I'll give it a shot.
Yeah.
And then for it to be successful enough, as you said, to look at a part-time job and go, well, screw this, I don't need to deal with this anymore, or at least take a
Yeah.
break from said part-time work and see, if it's a thing that will work in your favor, right?
Yeah. And honest, like the luck continued after that. That's that's the thing, and it seems like it's any creative industry. There's always a hefty luck element involved. Um, and the only way you can kind of manipulate that in your favor is just persistence. Um, you're gonna have to get lucky at some point, and the more the more you try, the more likely you're gonna roll the dice, and you're gonna get lucky. Um, like after that, I did the Music Machine, which is probably still the best of the narrative driven horror games that I did before Dusk. Um, and I figured in my naivete, I was like, okay, the Moonsliver did this well. I'm gonna make the Music Machine, which is gonna be bigger and better and cost more money. So I'm gonna make a ton more money off of it. And that's not quite how it worked out. Uh, the Music Machine sold okay, but it didn't sell that well. It's the best reviewed of all of them. But I didn't have that same luck because I kind of didn't understand how that luck had played into the game doing well. I don't think. Um, so it didn't sell that great, and started kind of feeling a bit panicky because, well, I quit my job. Um, so I think that's about the point where I started tuning pianos on the side as well, uh, to help make ends meet. And I made the fourth one, which was A Wolf in Autumn. Um, and I'd made all these within the space of like a year. So I was really burnt out by the time I was working on A Wolf in Autumn. Um, and you can see that in the finished game. It's probably got the most flaws out of them. Uh, but I just kind of made that as quickly as possible, hoping to reproduce that luck. I did release it and tried to do the same thing with the Halloween sale, and it kind of worked. It didn't take off like the Moonsliver, um, and it sold, I think, even less than the Music Machine did. Um, and then at that point, I was burnt out, and I decided I'm just going to take some time and um, make whatever I want, make some prototypes, figure out what I want to do next. And Dusk came out of that. And it just so happened that about the time that we were starting to run out of money, the games just kind of weren't paying the bills anymore. That's when I just happened to send a build to Dave, not even thinking that he would publish it. I didn't even know he published games. Like New Blood wasn't a thing on anyone's radar. It was just this thing that he had with like his friends. I just sent a build to him because I saw that he was a guy who worked on Rise of the Triad, or like the Rise of the Triad remake, and he was like a guy on Twitter, and I'm like, well, maybe he'll tweet about this, and then he was like, hey, why don't I publish this? Um, and that luck hit right when it's like we needed, you know, the money to start up, and then of course after that it hasn't really been an issue because Dusk has done pretty well. And I'm sure there's going to be plenty of other lucky breaks that will have to happen in the future for me to keep doing this job.
And from what you're saying, yes, luck, and not to speak down to what you've done at all, but it sounds like luck really has been in your favor. I
Yes, definitely.
there's uh, a quote that I've always liked, and it's luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. And I had to
Hmm.
look it up right now while I was talking. I believe it comes from someone named Kevin Davis. Anyway, I've always liked that quote because it's not just writing luck off as just this chaotic thing that's there. It's you put all this time in, you prepared, you're there, and it's just you know who knows about the inner workings or the behind the scenes for everything. For the Halloween sale,
Hmm.
it stacked up, and that was the opportunity and such. But for like New Blood, it who knows about the inner workings there, but the opportunity was there when he saw it and was like, oh hey, this is a thing we can do, and it paid off for you. And at that same time, Dusk kind of came out, depending on who you ask. Dusk was kind
Hmm.
of the forefather now of like the retro FPS games coming back into vogue, like being a thing that
Hmm.
exists. And it's just the amount of
Yeah, the timing of it coming out was extremely lucky as well. Because if Dusk released now, it wouldn't have done nearly as well. Because now the market's pretty saturated with those same sort of games. But when Dusk came out, there weren't really that many.
exactly, and not trying to downplay, all the other, your preparedness for this. It's just, the amount of luck is fantastic. And I think it's a
Yeah.
great thing that you were able to, get lucky because, it's the retro FPS, boom, to some people they would, fight to say that no, you're the Dusk, and you and everything is the reason it exists, and it's
Hmm.
it's just a fantastic thing to to mention. Sorry,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. I'm very I am very lucky.
now
And it's something I try not to ever forget. It's like, I've this has happened because I am good at some stuff, but also because of luck, not just because I'm awesome.
yes, exactly. Now and again, not to downplay any of that.
Mhm.
Now, I I apologize for this next question only because I saw recently you said on Twitter that you don't really like giving advice, however, or any
Gosh,
more
yeah.
advice anymore. However, based on your experience with everything, do you have any advice for those maybe seeking to get into the industry? If not, or if luck, find how to be lucky is the short and long of it, by all means. But whatever
Mhm.
you'd like to share, if you're willing.
Um. So okay. So there is nuance to that. I do like giving advice when it's stuff that I feel like is actually going to be useful in helping someone prepare. I really don't like talking about I don't like having to give things like here's pointers of how to get into the industry or things like that, because honestly it's like nobody knows the indie being an indie developer is like it's even though it's we think about it as having been a thing for a while in the grand scheme of like creative mediums, it's undiscovered. Like it's uncharted territory still. Um, and there is no like here's your bullet pointed list of how to get into doing this as a job and how to be successful at it and all this stuff. Um, and what you're referencing is I'm not gonna say what the specific thing was because the person ended up my finding my tweet about it and knowing it was about them, which was not my intention. But it's very frustrating for me as, I'm not the most experienced indie dev in the world, but I do have a lot of experience at this point. And it's very frustrating to see on Twitter um, other developers who really don't have that much experience to bring to bear or don't have experience doing or succeeding at the stuff they're even, they're trying to give advice about, and they'll just be out there saying this stuff, being like, "Oh, that you should do this or you should stop doing this or whatever," and it'll just be bad advice. It'll be like destructive, just wrong advice. And that's really frustrating for me because it's harming smaller, greener devs who are just starting out in what is a difficult industry that is probably only going to keep getting more difficult as time goes on. Um, so all that being said, um, I do like giving advice about kind of like mindset or things to consider, if that makes sense. I really don't have much to say about like here's the specific things you do and this will help you succeed, but I do have stuff about like for example, um being cautious about how you interact with your community. Uh like I think it's very important to keep a healthy relationship with the people that you're selling games to. Um and what I mean is that like you'll see developers on Twitter that just are constantly going off about how horrible gamers are, or they're finding like a negative review and they're like screenshotting it, a negative review of their game, and they're like screenshotting it and tweeting about it and just like venting to other developers and going on these rants about stuff. And um that's really so practically speaking, first of all, like that's not impressing the people you're trying to sell the game to. Like that makes you look bad. And sort of more like psychologically speaking, that wears you down. And I know this because I've been there. Like I was that angry person for a while. Um, and it makes it so that you start to hate what you're doing. And like if you hate the people you're making the stuff for and you don't really have any desire to bring them joy with it, that's going to come through in the games you're making. Um I'd also say that like you said you have your favorite quote about luck. Mine is that luck is a function of persistence. Um which is that I'm not going to tell anyone you shouldn't spend years making a big game for in an all or nothing bid for having that work out. I'm not going to tell you not to do that because it could work. Dusk was kind of that, and it did work. But I think if you're going to choose, it makes a lot more sense to me to work on a lot of smaller games that don't take as much time to make instead of going all in on a single big game. Like keep at it, keep making games. I think it's important um, to not just think about, oh, I want to get into the industry, but be very active about, I want to make a game, so I am going to make a game. And you sit down and you learn how to make the game, you make the game, you go through all the trouble involved with that, and then you release it. You don't spend, spend 5 or 6 years polishing it until it's perfect. You get it done, you get it out there, you get people to play it, and um, you listen to what they say, uh, even even if sometimes it's stupid, and you consider it, and then you apply all that to your next game, and that I think that's if you're gonna choose a way of trying to break in, I think to me that's the one that makes more sense. Is uh, keeping at it, making smaller things, and not doing what I've seen some other developers do, which is put years of their time and a lot of money into a project and then release it and have it bomb because, well, when they started the project maybe it would have done well, but by the time they finish it, the industry, which changes just on a yearly basis, it's just always changing. By the time they finish it, everything's changed enough where it's like it's not going to do well anymore. If uh, Edmund Macmillan made Super Meat Boy, and had spent a bunch of time and released it in like 2016 instead of when he did, it wouldn't have done well at all because um. Anyway, that's my uh yammering about that.
Well, thank you for that advice. And I understand completely what you're saying, and it's very much in line with what a lot of other developers say. And I'm not, and as I like to say for that as well, it's it's always fantastic to hear the consistency that is more or less
Mm,
shared
mhm.
from a lot of different people, because sometimes sometimes people just don't like to accept that that's kind of the the de facto answer. And every now and then you'll see
Right.
someone argue with it. It's like, oh no, just go for broke or whatever. And then you work on something for like 6 years, you get burnt out. Or you have like the Duke Nukem effect, or a game that you'll
Mhm.
probably be even more familiar with in this regard, the Stalker effect, where it started on like DirectX 4 and released on like DirectX 8 or whatever.
Yeah. Oh boy, Dev Hell.
Exactly, right?
That game was, yeah, it's amazing that game ever came out.
It really, really is. Um, Now, David, to move away from that, to maybe go back
Mhm.
a couple years in quotations here, did you have a favorite game as a child? And I know you did touch on Myst, so if it's Myst, we've already covered it, and we can move on. But did you have a favorite
Mhm.
game as a child, and what was it about that game that made it your favorite?
So, Myst is the obvious answer. And that's what I would say now. Like looking back, it was like, well, my favorite game was Myst. I'm not sure what I would have answered at that actual age. Not sure if it would have been Myst or if it would have been something else. But yeah, Myst is the one that, like, looking back now, um, the one I have the most memories of. It's the one that affected me the most. It's the one that I still. I mean, I'm sitting next to like 5 different Myst posters right now in my office. So yeah, Myst.
Well, that's, I don't think that's a wrong answer. Well, let me phrase that. There isn't really
Mhm.
a wrong answer, regardless of, thinking back to what it would have been 10 years ago versus today or what have you. But,
Right.
Myst did a lot of stuff. It started a lot of different, it kind of kickstarted a genre. It did a lot. So I think a lot of people can easily relate to Myst being, a favorite, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
The crazy thing about it is, and I don't think a lot of people realize this, but at the time that Myst released, um, I don't know if you remember a few years back, but there was like the hot button issue was walking simulators, and there was like people who were like, "These are not real games." One of the only things that I ever really uh like was really felt John Bain Total Biscuit was like really off about, which is his whole platform for walking sims. Was he was like, no, these aren't real games, they shouldn't be called games. I was like, no, no, that's dumb. But uh that was a huge big thing. But when Myst released, the same exact thing was being discussed around Myst, and there were people that were like furious about it and were like, I don't want games to go in this direction. If this is where games are going, I'm not, I'm done with them. Uh, which is kind of crazy to think back on. You can see it though, like when you play it. If you think of, it was the two biggest games of that time were Myst and Doom, and it's like that's a huge gap, but in what those games do.
Yes, exactly. And as you were mentioning that, it made me realize as well, like those kind of games were very reliant on, pushing buttons, clicking buttons, and the walking quote
Mhm.
unquote simulator aspect. But they leaned heavily on narrative design, and I don't think that was something that I'm not an expert on this, so I'm not going to claim that this is the real case. But you know, narrative design, I don't think really was a thing then, or as a concept was a thing then. But those kind of games really pushed everything being, everything having a purpose, and
Mhm.
meaning to tell a story. And outside of a lot of obvious reasons, I I honestly wonder where we would be without the games that Myst inspired back then and today even.
Yeah, I think. I mean, you had RPGs, but in '93, I don't even. I'm not really a RPG expert. I don't know what the state of them were at that point in '93. Myst was right '93, right? Yeah. So it was the same year as Doom, I'm pretty sure. Um. So yeah, it was a like a big step in terms of video game storytelling. At least for the games that I kind of know about. Again, I'm not really that solid on where CRPGs were at that point.
And I'm not an expert on that either, but yeah, the the landscape was very different then. And I think you're right, is that it's there were things weren't really as widespread in where they were going or what people were willing to do or able to do, at least in
Hmm.
North America. You look at Europe, where they were doing like Amiga and Commodore stuff, and all of that was just a giant home brewing. I don't want to say mess, because that infers like some form of negativity, but it was just pure, absolute, just people doing all sorts of crazy stuff. That,
It was just
yeah,
chaos.
chaos. Exactly. I think that's a good way for it. Now,
Huh. Yeah, I didn't know that.
oh yeah, if you're ever curious, they feel free to look into that. I'm no expert, so I'm not gonna try and get into explaining that. But uh, the personal computer, quote unquote, in terms of like the Commodore 64 and all of that, like MSV type stuff that Japan would have had. Um, North America didn't seem to explode with it, but Europe was massive, as far like from my understanding, and they
Okay.
went wild. Like, they would sell magazines, and that magazine would be like, hey, you want to play this game? and it would give you the source code, and you would have to manually type out all this stuff. Or
Holy
yeah,
crap!
yeah, it is absolutely bananas in the grand scheme of it, from my understanding. And like I said, I'm no expert, so I'm not going to sit here and try and explain it to you. Uh, but I would
Uh-huh.
encourage, if that sounds interesting, to look into it, because yeah, it's just wild to look at what was happening, on the other side of the oceans.
Yeah, that is interesting. I might have to look into that.
Now, you kind of touched on this one, and I'm going to make a jump, and I apologize if
Okay.
my assumption or presumption is wildly off, but would it be safe to say that one of the things that makes games or gaming enjoyable to you is immersive sims?
Yeah, I've always really liked systems in games, which is weird because so many of the games that I've made are not systemic, like, at all. Like all the horror games and stuff. But yeah, I've of course at the time I didn't know they were called immersive sims, but all the like Looking Glass Software stuff and Deus Ex and all that was was like huge for me when I played them.
And it's I myself also didn't really know what immersive sim was. It wasn't until just recently I actually learned what that that
Mhm.
genre descriptor was. I'd never really paid it any mind. Like for Stalker, for
Mhm.
example, I personally sat waiting for that one, as the first announcement at E3 back in, like, I don't know, 2002 or whatever. And I
Mhm.
would stay up late, going, dial up or what have you, watching letting those videos load where they were talking about how you could shoot through certain materials and all of that, and just how it kept getting delayed and delayed and delayed. And
Mhm.
it was one of the first games that I personally went out day one and bought, which to me now is just hilarious, because the first prince of Stalker uh, didn't actually have any authentication. So they provided you with a CD key that you would put into the authenticator, but when the authenticator
Uh-huh.
popped up, you could just hit enter and away it would go. There were no issues.
Ah!
Yep,
Really?
online play, offline play, whatever. Like, the authenticator did absolutely nothing.
That's very on brand.
Yeah, yes, it is. In hindsight, it is. It's right on the nose for the
Mhm.
game. But
Yep.
like, Stalker was, I think, the game for me that cemented that I liked that genre. Um,
Mhm.
and with the mods that have come out for it, and the next one coming out, um, it's great that more are coming, but it's also great that immersive sims are becoming more of a focus of things, only because
Right.
it's it's a lot to nail down. As you probably know, you're helping
Yes.
work on Gloomwood, which is, as I understand it, is an immersive sim, or at least in some way, shape,
It
or form.
is. Yep. It's a mashup actually of immersive sim and survival horror.
Which, I should have known that better, seeing as I did speak with Dylan some time ago about Gloomwood. Not to try and name drop, just saying that's on me. I should have known better. Um,
Mm,
but I think it's great that those games are getting more attention, are becoming more,
yeah.
of a thing, just because I Stalker was several years after Deus Ex when I played it, but I'm
Mhm.
very much looking forward to the future of those games, and when we might get to the era where Deus Ex games are more prevalent in the indie scene, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. There are like I think it's coming. And there are some of them. I know like uh when we started when Gloomwood started as a New Blood game, Dave, Dylan, and I all discussed that we felt like um, all three of us felt like that was the direction things were going. Um, was we are going to have a bit of a miniature indie immersive sim boom, and I think that's starting to happen. It's not going to be huge, I don't think. Just like the retro FPS, the indie retro FPS boom hasn't actually been that huge. I think people think it's like a bigger than it actually is. But I think we're gonna have a little miniature, you know, lots of indie Deus Exes and Thieves for a little while here, which will be cool.
Definitely, I look forward to it. I think others do as well. And only because I just thought of this question. Um, do you think at any point we're going to get into a weird revival of slav-jank games?
Um, in some ways, we're well. I mean, slav-jank transcends era. There was slav-jank in the 90s. It was there in the 2000s, and the 2010s, and the it's always been there in different forms. Um, and I think that there's maybe a little more appreciation for it now than there used to be. Um, which is awesome. You got games like which is personally that is my personal favorite of the my favorite non-New Blood like retro FPS throwback. I adore that game. You got like Civi, making a point of covering the janky games, which I appreciate. Uh, So I think there's definitely more appreciation for it now. Whether we're gonna see people deliberately making games like that, I don't know. I mean, I'm always influenced by slav-jank. If I had any artistic integrity, Dusk would have been much more slav-jank than it actually was.
All very fair and valid points. But yes, you kind of did touch on it. That I think my question really was more towards if we'll see intentional slav-jank. But as you also said and covered, I think it's not really a thing that's tied down to a certain era. It's
Yeah.
just a thing that exists, and whether or
Hmm.
not intentional or otherwise, it exists, and it'll probably continue to exist. And you know,
I sure hope so.
yeah,
I love the use of slav-jank. I mean, now it's sort of the dark era of slav-jank because it's mostly turned into shovelware. Steam shovelware is like the new slav-jank. Uh, but maybe we'll get back to the glorious days of cryostasis and Stalker and games like that.
and that's also something I didn't take into consideration. So thank you for pointing or reminding of that. Now, David, you did touch on some of this, and uh, I'm if I might, if you're okay if answering, I'm curious about outside of games. What other kind of
Hmm.
hobbies do you have and enjoy?
Um, well, yeah, I touched on of course, I write music. I sorry, my brain just blanked out. I write like books, stories a little bit. I like going geocaching, although since I live in Northwest PA, I can't do that for part of the year because the ground is covered in snow. Um, I like just going outside and taking walks. Of course, when I'm taking walks, I'm usually thinking about projects, so I don't know how much that counts. But let's see what else. Gaming, obviously, and then just the normal human stuff, watching movies, chewing food, those sort of things.
Exactly, exactly. And as you said, you have a wife and two children. So, I imagine in some way, shape, or form, you also enjoy spending time with your family.
Oh yeah, definitely. Well, I should say that depends what mood my oldest daughter is in. Uh, if she's in the mood where she's having a meltdown because she can't find her other shoe, I don't enjoy it quite as much as other times.
Now, I apologize. I am 34 and childless. I can't really
Hmm.
give any kind of advice to that. I've actually been told by numerous coworkers that I am not allowed to give child, rearing advice. So I'm just gonna. I wish there was something I could say for that. However, I have been told time and time again that any advice I offer for children related to children, I should not have children based on what I think should be done. And I don't say that because it's violent or anything. It's just, patently bad advice.
It's just not good.
No, no, and for example, I feel I can share this one because for me, I thought it was a brilliant idea. And a
Uh-huh.
coworker of mine was talking about how his wife was out running errands or something, and he had to use the washroom, and his like 3-year-old was being a 3-year-old, and he couldn't
Yes.
he couldn't take his eyes off of her. And my best suggestion was to just put her in some overalls, take her into the bathroom, hang her on the towel hanger, and do his business. Apparently, that is horrible advice, and I'm sure there's a lot of people that could explain it, and there's but this isn't really a child rearing podcast, so I'm just going to keep going with I don't understand why it's bad advice, but I'll accept that it was.
Well, I feel like there's you know what the uncanny valley is, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so I feel like that principle applies to a lot of things. That idea of a bell curve where like um you know and I feel like that there's a bit of a bell curve here where like um the further into parenting you go, like you get far enough into parenting and you're like, wow, that's horrible advice and terrible, and then you get even further into parenting and you're like, yeah, that would probably work.
It might be the kind of advice you take and consider on your second or third child, just not the first, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so first of all, second children uh are bat I can't say the word, but they're insane. Second children are nuts. We have our second child is 2, and she's just a little gremlin. We love her and she's adorable and sweet, but she's into everything, and she's maniacal. And like the first one was just sweet and a rule follower, and this one is just like, she's a little imp. And that's where you're like, okay, the hanging them by the overalls doesn't sound like the worst idea in the world.
So, thank you, David. I feel a little vindicated hearing this just because um, it gives me hope for the nonsense I might pull if I ever were to have children. Um, anyway, I digress. Now, David, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. However,
Okay.
if there was anything else you wanted to discuss, a cool game, what else you're doing, I'm assuming there's always a lot of stuff that you're doing, or just something you feel
Yeah.
more people should just be more aware of, the floor is yours as well. Please let everyone know where they can
Okay.
find any more information about you, because I'll also include that in the episode description for you.
Okay. Let's see. Everyone needs to play End of Dias. It's this indie game on Steam that I found that had like 30 reviews, and it's one of the most fun things I've played in a while. Uh, let's see what else. I mean, there's a whole bunch of games everyone should play. I think that as I've gotten a platform because of my terrible tweets, and because of making Dusk. Um, I've become more and more like passionate about this idea of discoverability and trying to help other smaller games uh get get known to people. So I'm always going through Steam and trying to find these like really obscure games that deserve to be boosted, and that's one of them. And it's fantastic. And if you like Link to the Past and you want a first person Link to the Past that to explore, it's that. um let's see, as far as my stuff, Iron Lung is coming out on March 10th, and Iron Lung is a uh short dread driven horror game. It's a submarine horror game. If you're afraid of the ocean, this is the game for you. It's a game where you go down into a ocean of blood in a tiny submarine, and you can't see anything, so there's just stuff around you that you're hearing. And I've been told it's pretty spooky by people who have played it. So that's coming March 10th. Gloomwood is coming sometime before the sun fizzles out. Uh, hopefully. If it releases after the sun fizzles out, well, I mean, there won't be anyone around to really yell at us for that. So let's see what else. And then yeah, if for some reason you want to follow my Twitter, it's at duskdev. And there's a whole lot of poop posting that goes on my Twitter. It's not Do not follow me for insightful developer commentary or anything like that. Um and I also have a Steam creator page, which is just if you click my name on anything on Steam, or if you search David Szymanski, you should be able to find it.
Awesome, and thank you for all of that. I will make sure all of those things are included in the episode description. And
All right.
when it comes to end of Dias, I actually I saw that you were talking about that, and I saw it spawned off a few other people talking about it. So I really like what you're kind of taking your uh, popularity. I don't know the right word. I apologize. I forget the word you used, even though it
God,
was like
man,
seconds ago.
platform,
Platform.
I
There we go.
guess. Yeah.
I think that's a great thing that you're doing because I from what I've seen of End of Dias, I think it looks fantastic, and
Mhm.
it's on my list of things to eventually get to, because an ever growing
Mhm.
backlog. It's you
Oh, I
want to
know,
tame
right?
it, right, before you jump too
God.
heavy into some other things.
Yeah.
But I appreciate that you shared that because it looks fantastic, and I I just think that's a great thing to do. To you have a platform that can be used for both good and chaos.
Yeah, I kind of use it for both.
Uh, but which far be it from me to say anything about. I am personally a fan of the absurdity of chaos and where it can all go. But
Yes.
being able to see these neat games that other people find is fantastic. And like I said, I look forward to when I do have time to try End of Dias. And thank you for throwing that out there, because without you doing that, I'm sure myself and many others would never had seen that and potentially missed out on a great experience.
Yeah, it was just sitting there. Someone actually I didn't find it organically. Um someone recommended it to me because they're like, "Hey, I know you love like exploration in games. Well, this game's really good at, has some really good exploration." It's just sitting there with like 30 reviews, and it's one of the yeah, I don't know. It's heartbreaking sometimes because you can't, there's always going to be some game out there that deserves more uh that deserves, more players than it actually has. But I feel like if everyone kind of does what they can to try and discover stuff that's hidden, maybe we can save some of them.
Yeah, exactly. I understand what you're saying, and it's unfortunate that a lot of the discussion surrounding hidden gems today is about, like hidden gems from like the Super Nintendo, the 64, the whatever, whatever, whatever. It's never
Yeah.
about modern hidden gems. It's always about older hidden gems. And it's
Yeah, that's true. I had never thought of that, but yeah, you're right.
it's just unfortunate that it's we're not quite there to have things to push that. And Steam Next Fest started today, and I
Yeah, I'm gonna go through
I
those
think
point
I
here.
think what Steam is doing, what Itch also does. I shouldn't disregard Itch. I shouldn't disregard GOG, because they do similar things. So does Humble, and
Hmm.
everyone more or less, the big multi publishers, I'll call them. They all have their own way of doing it, but it's always great they are that they're doing that, and not just
Hmm.
hunkering down and calling it a day, because
Yeah,
realistically.
Steam is actually I know there's debate about, there's too many games on Steam and stuff. But I really think that what it seems like they're trying to do, and haven't always been completely successful at, but they're trying to put a lot into like discoverability tools and stuff. And those tools aren't perfect, but they're the best on any storefront that I'm aware of. Just the number of options you have for discovering games on Steam if you want to. You've got your queue, they've got the interactive recommender, and then you could just, go out into the wilderness yourself, and you have all these options for how to sort games and how to exclude different tags and stuff. It's very robust, and it's not perfect, but I think that approach is the best one because realistically speaking, there's always been too many games. Um, I think some people have a bit of a rose tinted goggles for like the glory days of, when you could release a game on Steam and you'd make millions of dollars, any game that released on Steam. The reality was, though, as someone who was making indie games during that time, um, there weren't any less games being made. It's just all of that stuff was going, like I said, on Newgrounds or whatever. It was just a lot of people making games and not having no expectation or ability to make money off of them. Um, I think we're in a far better position now where it's like, yeah, the playing field's been level, and that, there's definitely challenges there, but at the same time, I go through my discovery queue and I find these, I've kind of trained it a bit at this point where it shows me obscure stuff, and I'll regularly see games where it's like, oh, this is a neat looking game. It's not really for me. I'm probably not going to look at it, but it looks competent, and or even ones that don't even look that competent. And I'm like, ah, that doesn't look very good at all. And they'll have like 10 or 15 reviews. So that person who back in 2010 or 2007 or whatever, they would have gotten nothing from that. That person put it on Steam and they got, I don't know, a few $100s from it. That's awesome. That's a huge that's a huge advancement over what we had only, a few decades ago. Even though, it is, hard to get noticed or for a game to really get to that point where it can be super successful and all that stuff.
Exactly, and that is largely something that I agree with. A lot of what you've said, I have also said over the many years, or the last couple years at least, where Steam has put more effort into doing such things and making their discoverability queue, some of their other recommending systems that you can find through Steam Labs. There we go.
Yeah.
All of that I think is just fantastic because the way that I always, not to go off too much of a tangent because I want to let you go, but one of the things that I always, when people would complain to me about Steam, that I would always say is, you don't you don't go to the dairy, like you don't walk into Walmart or Target or wherever and go to the dairy section to get milk and then sit there going, "Oh, I'm going to wander through the milk section and see what's new in ice cream." You're going for milk, you're most
Hmm.
likely going to get milk, get out. The only time you're going to idly walk through is when you're like, "Well, let's see what they have. I feel like ice cream, but I don't know what ice cream." And then you wander through the ice cream. And that's how I've always viewed Steam, and it to me, they've been leaning into that same kind of mentality where if you want to go looking for a puzzle game, you're going to go to the puzzle genre and you're going to casually go through puzzles. You're not going to go to, the first person shooter game section and be like, "Oh, there's no puzzles here," because, that's typically not how your brain works, how you're wired.
Hmm.
So, yes, sorry, it's a bit of a roundabout way to, but just saying, yes, I understand what you're saying and I agree completely, and I'm happier for it because you were as more games are coming out, it's harder to know what you might want to look for. And sometimes
Hmm.
you just don't find those things unless you go casually looking, or Steam, in the form of the discovery queue, goes, "Hey, stupid, do you want to play soccer?" You go, "Well, no." And then it goes, "Okay, well, what about this, this new retro first person shooter game?" You go, "Oh, well, there we go." It does it sometimes in weird ways, as anyone who follows you
Hmm.
on Twitter will be well aware of. but
Mhm.
but at least it's
It's like, why are you showing me so many hentai games? I've never played a hentai game. Like, why? Why am I getting like weird? Well, yeah, I won't get into it.
yes, I understand completely where you're coming from. Um, that is a whole separate conversation that
Yeah,
not the time nor the
their system
place.
isn't perfect, is what I'm
Yes,
saying.
exactly. But but anyway, David, as I was saying before, I agree completely, but I do want to let you go. It's almost 10 o'clock, and it's I'm sure you have an evening you would like to decompress over and everything. So if there wasn't anything else you wanted to throw out there to discuss, I will definitely let you get on with your evening and just relax.
Okay, yeah, I think that's about it for me.
Awesome. Well, I'm like I said, I'm not going to keep you here any longer. So, thank you again, David, for making time to have this conversation with me, and thank you for joining us on the Red Tunic podcast, as well as this.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, awesome. As well as a special thanks to Ron Jenkins for the use of music from the title track from Road Steep. And if you like this podcast and want to support it and help it grow, please subscribe or follow me on Twitter at Red Tunic Podcast to receive the latest episodes and news, and be sure to share it with those you think might also enjoy it. Thanks, and until next time.